Hello then, and welcome to this video on F1 2020 using the PlayStation 5, and we're going to have a look at my force feedback and button layout settings for the wheel. Now the wheel I'm using is the Logitech G29. So let's go into controllers, vibration and force feedback, and you can see there I've got a custom control scheme. So let's go into there. So we'll have a look at the vibration and force feedback settings first. So you want to make sure that this is turned on, obviously, otherwise you're not going to get any feedback at all through the wheel. So the first setting we have is vibration and force feedback strength. So I've set this at 90. You want to make sure that you get a decent amount of force feedback so that you can feel how the car is reacting to the road. But you don't want it too high because otherwise the wheel just has a bit too much weight, and obviously a Formula 1 car will have power steering and it won't have a very heavy wheel, so you want to make sure it's not too high. You don't want a really heavy wheel. On-track effects, so these are the sort of bumps and little bits in the road that you feel as you're driving down the straights. You can lower that a little bit further if you want to. I've lowered a little bit from the default. I don't like it bumping around too much because it's a little bit distracting, but you still want to have a little bit of feel for what's on the track. So rumble strip effects, I've turned this down again quite a lot. If you leave it on default, it vibrates and rattles quite a lot over the curbs, and it can just be a little bit annoying, so I've lowered that down to 20. You can lower it down further again if you want to. And the off-track effects, that's the feeling you get through the wheel when you go off the track. So you shouldn't really be going off the track if you can help it, but if you do, this is what you'll feel. Again, I've lowered this because if I do go off the track, I want to be able to get on reasonably quickly. I don't want to be distracted too much by the gravel, etc. So I've lowered that so it's not too distracting. And then here we have the wheel damper. This basically just adds a load of weight to the wheel. So the default setting is 5. I've played around with it a little bit up and down, and 5 seems about right. If you go up, you know, past 10, 15, 20, the wheel just personally feels too heavy for me. It doesn't feel like how I would imagine a Formula 1 car steering wheel to feel. So yeah, we've lowered that down to 5. Understeer enhanced, this can be quite useful to turn on if you're new to the game. Basically, as you're going into a corner, it will really, the wheel will go very, very light if you go past the maximum grip available from the front wheels, but it's not massively realistic, so I've got this turned off. And then the maximum wheel rotation, I've set this to 370 degrees, and for me that just matches with the steering wheel on the game. So if you want to test that on your own wheel, just pull up to a complete stop, go onto the cockpit camera and just turn the wheel one full rotation and make sure it matches up with what you see on screen. Basically, I'll just try to match it the best I can so that it is not distracting if I'm driving in cockpit view. The default setting is 360 degrees, so I noticed that on my wheel personally on the G29, if I did a full turn, it wouldn't quite go to 360 degrees, so I've put it up to 370 and it has solved that problem perfectly. Right, so let's go on to the calibration settings then. So I haven't adjusted any of these personally, but I'll talk through them very quickly and tell you what they do. So the steering dead zone will basically put a little bit of dead zone when the wheel is straight, so that if you turn the wheel slightly, there won't be any input initially. The steering linearity will basically adjust the sensitivity of the wheel at the center point. So if you increase this, it will be less sensitive at the center when you're in a straight line, and more sensitive as you turn the wheel further. Steering saturation kind of does the opposite. So if you increase the saturation, you basically have an increase in the sensitivity. Throttle dead zone, like the steering dead zone, it just gives you a bit of dead zone at the initial input of the throttle. So if you rest your feet on the brake and throttle pedal and notice down here, the throttle you start getting an input there with the brake, just because you're resting your foot slightly on it. Then I would add in that dead zone so that it takes that out and you're not putting in inputs when you're driving that you don't want to. Linearity can make the initial throttle application a little bit less sensitive, and the saturation will basically increase the sensitivity, and the same with the brake linearity and the brake saturation. So on to the button layout then, and obviously accelerator, we've got that's the accelerator and brake. Steering obviously, so clutch, this is for the start, is also the same as gear up. Next camera I don't use because you can adjust that in the menu, and I don't really adjust the camera while I'm driving. Look back we've got as X, but we also have the virtual mirror turned on, which I highly recommend if you're going to be racing anyone online, because you can quickly switch to it and it's less distracting than pressing button to look behind you. So we've got the DRS as triangle, and we have the overtake button as circle, which is actually further down the bottom. The reason we've put overtake as circle and the DRS as triangle is you only have to hit the DRS once and it deactivates when you brake. So if we were to do it the other way round and you had circle for the activate DRS and then the triangle button for the overtake, because the overtake you have to either hold or toggle on and off, sometimes you can accidentally hit circle and turn the DRS off, which you don't want to do on the straight. So around this way with a circle as the overtake button, it's very easy to turn that on and off without accidentally pressing triangle instead. So pit limiter, we've set that as the return button, the big return button. Radio voice commands I don't really use, so I haven't set that as anything. MFD as square, and then up, down, left and right to adjust the MFD. Don't use push to talk, and then gears doesn't matter too much. If we go on to MFD shortcuts, you can set some of these up. I know some of you might want to look at the engine temperatures and the tyre temperatures. So generally I'd assign these to maybe L2, R2, L3 or R3. But what I've done for those buttons is I've got the fuel mix increase for R3, so on the right, and the fuel mix decrease for L3 on the left. And then for R2 and L2, we've got the ERS mode increase and decrease. So it's a very simple way to adjust that up and down for each one rather than having to go through the MFD. And then we've got the big plus button and the big minus button for the brake bias. And then the differential is the red turnable switch. That pretty much covers all of my wheel settings. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll try to respond as quick as I can. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and feel free to subscribe. Most of my videos will be on Gran Turismo Sport, but I will try and do more videos on Formula 1 if people enjoy it. Thanks a lot. Bye.